Hi again then guys, and welcome to a kind of video which I haven't done for quite some time on the channel, for over a year in fact, and it's a type of video which I didn't think I would be coming back to. Now first of all, to speak to why the screen looks like this, I'm basically, for the sake of simplicity, just using the same setup that I would have for a live stream, but of course there won't be a live chat over here because the video is pre-recorded. But this channel started off with just this: movie reviews. But then I stopped doing them, and I explained why on my main channel, HSG Automotive, and also in a community post on this channel as well, which is basically a combination of two things. And that was that because of the fact that I used stills and images from the movies that I was talking about, I would commonly get two issues. One is that studios would often claim the videos, which is understandable. It's still BS as far as I'm concerned, but understandable. And the second one is that YouTube themselves, due to the nature of the films that I often talk about, would flag the videos, or at least demonetize them, making the videos essentially a waste of time. So I've decided to change things up. Instead of having on-screen images, it's going to be me on screen, more of a traditional movie review in that sense. And the second change is going to be that, of course, without those potentially gory or bloody images, it should be less of an issue, maybe not completely gone, but less of an issue with, well, demonetization. But the second massive change that I'm making is that I'm completely restructuring the way that I do these movie reviews. And the reason why is because I realised, being honest and looking back over my reviews, many of which, you know, OG members of this channel will remember, The Thing, Splinter, all these kind of movies, I would review them from the point of view very much as a content creator myself. I'm an author, I'm a YouTube content creator, so I would look for stuff like production quality, special effects, audio, acting, not so much just the enjoyment of a film. And although I did talk about that, I think that's more of what most people care about. So I've decided to come back and to completely restructure the way I do these videos. So I'm going to be doing no scoring at all. And that might disappoint some people, but we're going to see how it goes, and I think it will be more of a pure, authentic experience to just talk about the film. And speaking of talking about the film, these new structure videos are also going to have another significant difference, and that is two parts. Because each movie that I review on the channel, and it probably won't be as many as before, I'm going to be structuring the video into two separate categories. The first half, if you will, is going to be a non-spoiler review. The second half is going to be a full spoiler review, not a breakdown of the whole story, but just to be able to get into things that I liked and maybe disliked the most about a particular film that you simply cannot do in a non-spoiler review. So I know this is a lengthy intro, but I want to get it all out there in this video because then I can just reference this video in future instead of repeating this same thing over and over again. Now, as you saw from the title, of course, this is a late review. Joker came out last year. It was my favourite movie, to be honest, of last year. I also loved Ford v Ferrari and Parasite, but for me, Joker was my number one. And the reason why I've decided to come back and review it is because it inherently appeals to the kind of core audience that I have on the channel. And also, it's just such a great film, in my opinion. Now, that shows my cards to some degree, and yes, I did enjoy it a lot. And it's been a very divisive movie, interestingly, both before, of course, and after release. Because before release, everyone was going on about, oh, it's going to cause riots, and it didn't, long story short. But the second interesting thing that I've seen a lot of reviewers say is that they've actually kind of liked it less with a rewatching, or maybe even disliked it after a certain amount of time. Maybe thought that the performance of Joaquin Phoenix was great, but the film itself perhaps wasn't. I can understand those points. For me, that's not the case, but I can understand that perspective. Now, I'm going to keep the non-spoiler part relatively brief because most of you will have seen this movie by this point. It had like a $30 million budget, made about $1 billion, so plenty of people have seen it. So, the non-spoiler breakdown is, it's a Joker origin film. You can see that from the trailers, you can assume that from the story. It's more focused on Joker than Batman or anything else in the kind of DC universe, and I think it's all the better for it. Now, the essential plot is a kind of story that's hard to get into without spoiling anything, because in an oversimplified form, it's basically a story about mental health and the kind of bullying and issues that can not only cause that in the first place, but can also add to it over time. And one of the reasons I think why I enjoy Joker so much is because even some of the movies, some of the stories, I should say, that I've written, including my first book, Buddy, which shameless self-plug, you can get on Amazon. That story is about mental health as well. So having a movie like this, which is harder-edged, it is R-rated, it earns that rating as well, not just in terms of language, but gore as well, and it's certainly a mature subject matter in terms of its approach. It just appeals to me. It's the kind of thing which reminds me, in a very slight degree, to Buddy, my first book. The story isn't the same, but if you read it, I think you'd know what I meant. Now, in terms of whether or not I would recommend it from a non-spoiler point of view, first of all, the simple answer is yes, because this is the kind of movie, in my opinion, where you don't need to be a comic book fan to enjoy it. In fact, you might even appreciate certain aspects of it more if you're not a comic book fan, in terms of, being faithful to certain things or taking liberties with the source material. But also, I think that you can just be a movie fan in general, and there's plenty to love about the film. Even if you don't like the film, and this is the one consistent thing about pretty much everyone who's seen it, even people who don't like the movie still appreciate Joaquin Phoenix's performance, because it's great. And it was fantastic. It was a great role for him. Personally, I would have loved to have seen maybe a couple of other people as Joker potentially as well. Not in this movie, but I think Willem Dafoe could play a great Joker. He's certainly got the look for it, maybe even more of a Hamill-style Joker. And I believe that Jake Gyllenhaal, after seeing Nightcrawler, could probably do a very interesting Joker as well. If nothing else, maybe even a Riddler character. But it was Joaquin Phoenix. I love his performances in all of his films, Gladiator, Signs, more recently You Were Never Really Here, which I enjoyed a lot as well. He was great in the role. He's perfect, in fact. I believe he could not have done any better than he did in the film. It was a perfect performance, and one of my favourite things about it as well is how different it felt to, of course, Heath Ledger. Because you had to be. Just like how Heath Ledger was different to Jack Nicholson, who's different to Hamill, each of them has to be different. And it was. There were shades of Joker in there, but that's one of the great things about the Joker as a concept. You can change him up and still have that same kind of pure vibe that's still unarguably Joker. You can tell that. Even if the movie wasn't called Joker, if they'd, for instance, called it something else like Arthur, you'd still know it was a Joker film because it's just got that vibe to it. In a similar way to Nightcrawler. You could have called Nightcrawler Joker and I think it would have still been authentic to some degree. Now, as far as getting into the more spoiler portion of the video, some of the things that I did and didn't enjoy, maybe about the film, the stuff that I enjoyed the most doesn't necessarily get too much into spoiler territory, to be honest, because it really is that performance. My favourite parts of the performance were the moments where he's not actually snapping, but the moments where you can see he's almost there. And that is basically the first half of the movie, I guess you could say. And I do hear a lot that people tend to prefer the first half to the second half, and I can understand that. But maybe stuff that isn't so good, well, to be honest with you, there's not much for me. I actually thoroughly enjoyed the overwhelming majority of the film. I get that some people didn't really like maybe some of the comic references, the way that Batman was worked in, for instance, is a common one. I think the only nitpicks that I have about the film tend to be things that don't actually matter too much. For instance, the way that Arthur, or not Arthur, the way, Alfred, that's his name, not Arthur, the butler, Batman's butler, Alfred. The way he's kind of choked out by Arthur, wasn't a fan of that. You know, if you know anything about the comic background of Alfred, you know he's not a little bitch. So that was kind of a weird scene to me. He's a bigger guy, he's handled himself, he's had a past, I believe military, if I recall correctly. So that was a little bit off. I wasn't necessarily a huge fan of the way they dealt with Thomas Wayne, but I get it. It was kind of something which you had to do for this story to work, because he was so intrinsic, and of course this is spoiler territory with potentially being Arthur's father. I happen to subscribe to the opinion that he's not his father in the film, but without that, the film probably would have took either a lot longer to get going, to really make Arthur snap, or it wouldn't have happened at all, because that father figure is so important to him in the film. The lack of it the actual father figure that he had, you know, in the unarguable sense, the one who beat him. All of that kind of stuff, I think, it was just necessary. It had to be done in the film. Do I like it as much? No, but it worked. It worked for this movie. Now, there are two final things that I want to also bring up in the review as far as the ending, and also one of my favourite things as well is the soundtrack. The music is incredible. The score is fantastic. It gave the movie such a dense, almost sickly feeling of just despair and hopelessness. Fantastic soundtrack. Absolutely loved it. Loved the cinematography as well. The locations are grimy. You know, it looks like an authentic Gotham, regardless of the time period. But to get to that ending, which people love to go back and forth on even, did the movie happen? Is it all in his mind? Is that the point of the you wouldn't get it joke? On this point, I believe that I actually fall on the side of the argument to say, yes, I do believe it was in his head. And after I first watched the movie, I would have probably not said that. I would have said that I believe everything in the movie actually happened. But there are two reasons why I believe it didn't happen and that it was all in his head. One is comic related, and the second is movie related. The comic related reason why I think that is the case is because that is perfect for the Joker. We saw that with Heath Ledger. He made up a new story every time. Even with something like Jack Napier in Batman 89, he had a definitive backstory, but he never really brought it up, as far as I can remember. If that had been open-ended, he would have probably made something up in the film as well. Just something about the Joker suits this idea of not being pinned down to any single backstory, because that's exactly what the Joker would do. He would hate to be pinned down to anything beyond his own style, or to have Batman as an enemy. The second reason is actually more of a practical one. In the movie, toward the start of the film, when he's talking to his personal agent, I guess, in social services, she mentions even about him being in Arkham for a while, and you briefly cut away to a moment where he's in the full white garb, banging his head against the window of a cell. That is never referenced again. Even when he looks through his mother's history in that folder, it's never brought up again. Never even mentioned, never thought of, nothing. He doesn't even act like he feels either comfortable or uncomfortable in Arkham. When he's talking to the clerk, he acts as if he's brand new, like he's never been there before, just standing there like any old customer would. I find that interesting. And I believe that in a movie as deliberately told as this one, that was not a mistake. I believe that that moment that it cuts away to is actually the same as the end of the movie. I believe he has been in the cell the entire time. I believe that the entire thing was in his mind, and I believe that is the point, the true point, a double meaning kind of thing of that final you wouldn't get the joke concept when he's talking to the woman at the end. Now, I believe that him killing her at the end was real. And I believe that in a similar way to how Heath Ledger probably had elements of truth in different parts of his story, I think that this concoction in Arthur's mind does probably have elements of truth as well, because the best lies are laced with truth. So I believe that some of it probably did happen to him, or maybe even happened to somebody who he knew. Maybe, for instance, if you look at the importance of his character of the mother in the film, maybe more of it happened to his mother than him. And maybe he kind of imprinted that on himself, as if certain things that happened to her had almost happened to him vicariously. Of course, this is all speculation, but if I were writing the film, this is the kind of stuff that I would be thinking about and that I would be having in my mind as I'm writing something different. The real behind-the-scenes meaning and feeling kind of stuff. So that's my thoughts on Joker overall. It is a late review, but it's something which I definitely wanted to talk about on the channel because I love good movies, period. I love comic books, I love the Joker, I love Batman, and I think that regardless of its age, it is a movie that still deserves to be talked about. Whether you love it or hate it, you kind of can't not have an opinion on it, unless of course you just haven't seen it. I didn't really hear anyone who just felt indifferent to the film. I understand some people could think it was too slow or maybe boring even, and that's more of an attention span thing than the movie, because there are plenty of long, slower films which are great. I think that the point is, everyone who's seen it either doesn't like it or does. There are very few people who are like, well, I don't know if I liked it or not. It tends to be fairly definitive. There's no middle ground. Overall then, of course, I would recommend checking out Joker. I would love to hear your thoughts down below if you did watch it. Did you love it? Did you not? What do you think about my theory as far as the ending? As I said, I do believe it was in his mind, maybe with some elements of truth in there, but completely reworked, because that's exactly what the Joker would do. And that's it overall. So I am going to be dropping some more movie reviews on the channel, probably over the coming weeks, not just coming days. And one of those, maybe even the next review, is going to be for Velvet Buzzsaw, which I watched recently. So stay tuned for that one. And another shameless self-plug, stick around on the channel this Saturday, if you're watching this the day of. So that is today's the 17th of April, 2020, because this Saturday I'm going to be releasing my third story, a short story, the third in my sequence of Buddy, Spore, and now my new story, which is going to be released exclusively on YouTube, so you can listen to it for free. And the name of that story is A Room Called Sin. So check it out. I think you might enjoy it. If you enjoy movies like Joker and the kind of movies that I review, I think you'll probably enjoy it. So check that out. If you're watching this video later on down the line, which will probably be most of you, then of course just search up A Room Called Sin on the channel and you'll find the video. So check that one out. Tell me what you think. And of course, until next time, I'll see you then. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.